everyone. Welcome. I am here with Karen, who, as we all should know, is the amazing strategic director here at AMP Global Youth. But she is also senior director at Moms Rising and works on workplace justice campaigns for women and families. So we're going to get to hear a lot about her work and how it relates to the reconciliation bill that's trying to get through Congress at the moment. So to start off, Karen, do you want to talk about what your involvement is at Moms Rising, what kind of workplace justice means?
It's really nice to be with you. I'm excited to be talking about some of the other work I do in my life outside of AMP Global Youth, even though all of this work and this momentum towards communities and countries and economies that support people overlaps both organizations and both efforts. So I like to think we do the same kind of work at AMP Global Youth as I'm going to talk about my doing with another organization, which is Moms Rising. So you'd asked what exactly my role is. I run campaigns and I mobilize people, in particular in the state of Pennsylvania, around issues affecting them and their families. And a lot of the work I do is under the umbrella of workplace justice, meaning loosely that we're fighting to create workplaces and an economy that support working people, acknowledging the different ways the systemic challenges and biases we face affect those within our community, our neighbors, ourselves, and so on. For example, a lot of the issues I work on have a much greater impact on people of color and on women and on people who have historically been marginalized from our economic system. So that's the kind of justice reference, is recognizing we need to move everything forward, but we also need to acknowledge the particular impacts and challenges that some of us face as a result of the system in which we exist. So to break it down a little further, some specific issues I work on include paid family and medical leave, the wage gap and equal pay, early learning or childcare, and things like raising the minimum wage and making sure immigrant workers are included in provisions we're talking about, making sure pregnant and breastfeeding workers are included in our workplaces and supported by the system, and so on.
So, Karen, how does all of your work on these issues tie into the reconciliation bill in Congress?
Yes, that's a very good question. If you're in the United States right now, you have likely heard of the reconciliation process, which is happening right now in the US Congress. And it is by nature a little bit obtuse. It's maybe hard to understand. I'm going to try and give a very top line definition of it. And then I'm going to talk about how it's one of many ways we push forward issues we care about. So reconciliation is something we can do in Congress to push forward legislation that changes spending, revenues, or the federal debt limit. Reconciliation can be used to address certain kinds of spending, what we call entitlement spending. So things like Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and so on. It can affect all types of spending. That's why you might have seen some of the debate over things that can or can't be included. And the very kind of skinny version of the process is that the reconciliation process involves the House and the Senate, our two big chambers on Capitol Hill, to agree on a resolution that gives specific instructions to committees. Our House and our Senate, both are composed of committees that address different issues. And so each of those committees comes up with decisions on legislation and spending they would like to include. That comes back to the full body. Hopefully the House and the Senate agree on it, but if they don't, they go to what we call conference committee to smooth over any, disagreements or different priorities. And then it goes on to being passed. That's all very similar to how a lot of legislation moves through US Congress, right? We have both the House and the Senate. And I never assume that everybody has had a full civics education. So if you're watching and you're like, obviously we have a House and the Senate, I never assume people fully understand all of that. Basically, each is coming up with their own proposal of the bill. They smooth out any differences, and then it goes towards being passed. So the big interesting point about reconciliation is it can pass with a simple majority in the Senate. It is not subject to what we might call the filibuster or the need to have 60 votes to pass something. Right now, one of our parties, the Democrats, does have that majority. So that's where they have the power to push something through that might not get through otherwise. Now, why this matters is that this is an attempt to provide really critical supports for people and workers and families in the United States following COVID-19. Everything included is believed to help get us back on track, to help people re-enter the workforce, to help families catch up, to once again be able to put food on their tables and survive in this really, really difficult climate. So what's called the Build Back Better plan is an attempt to really provide important investments in people in the United States. There's a lot of debate over what's being included and how much we should fund things. And it's interesting, you know, if you're interested in issues or in politics, watching this whole process play out is a demonstration of the system we have now for all of its strengths and weaknesses. If I were to step back from reconciliation, I would say that right now, reconciliation is the vehicle we have to move forward progress on the issues we care about. There are others that we have pushed in previous times, right? So I work on paid family and medical leave including now, but previously, the Family Act was an act that had been introduced in the House and the Senate that there are sponsors and co-sponsors of that proposes a national paid family and medical leave program that would go through a similar process towards getting passed. So when we look at an issue we care about, whether it's the minimum wage or immigration or healthcare or any of the workplace justice issues I've mentioned, we look at different moments to move them forward. Really importantly is to acknowledge that I'm talking federal level. A lot of issues you care about in the United States can also pass at the state or the more local level. There are counties and cities that have passed paid sick days, for example, that have passed things like plastic bag bans. So when there's an issue you care about, do know what's happening at the federal level, and that will supersede, actually, in most cases, it'll provide what we call a floor to things that might happen more locally. So the federal is like the standard for it. But your state or your county or your city might go beyond that and do even more. That's a simple, but also maybe a little bit complicated way to say that, you know, an issue you care about moves in different ways. It'll move at different levels of government. There's a lot of similarity between how it moves and what we do as advocates to push them forward. And as an advocate, one of the things we do is just look and see what's moving at the time, where we have an opening, where we can get something passed. Right now, because of COVID and the urgent need of the current administration and lawmakers to provide supports to people in the United States to help them get back to work, to help them get back on their feet, the vehicle, the opportunity is reconciliation.
And then I was just wondering what specific workplace justice provisions are in the bill. Is there anything that excites you specifically?
Yes. So in the work that I do, there are a good handful of things that we're highlighting in particular, and I'll list them off, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about a couple of them. One is comprehensive paid family and medical leave, childcare, critical, expanding and making permanent the child tax credit, a pathway to citizenship for immigrant workers, and support for home and community-based caregiving. Now, all of these together are a really good, strong proposal for pushing or for providing supports for workers and families. They're not everything, right? You haven't heard me mention the minimum wage. There's lots of other issues that are not included in that current package. So the work is broader than that, but these are the things that are getting a lot of attention and discussion right now in the package.
So what is the child tax credit provision? Can you talk more about that?
Yes. So the child tax credit has been expanded. In the tax year 2020, it was $2,000 per child. And now it is $3,600 for each child under 6. And for kids ages 6 to 16, it's $3,000. Another really important part of it is that you can get advance payments on it. I believe those started in June or July of this summer. So families get a payment every month, an advance payment on that tax credit for the year that we're in now. So basically, it's putting money right into the pockets of families with young kids, which is urgently needed for a whole host of reasons, one of which is childcare. Right now, childcare costs more than college in many parts of the United States. And there are a lot of different sides to the issue. And I'll just paint it very kind of broad strokes. The accessibility of care, the number of spots that are available, the cost of childcare, and conditions affecting childcare workers, including what they're getting paid. So all sides of the childcare system were in great crisis before COVID and now are in absolute crisis. So the cost of childcare and accessibility of childcare is one thing that child tax credit will help families afford. But to connect the dots, the reconciliation bill also includes massive supports in the sector, the childcare sector, so that we're going to hopefully help provide more spots, provide better quality care, support providers more, and so on.
Here at AMP Global Youth, we always try to look at things from a global perspective. So I was wondering, how does the US compare to other countries on workplace justice issues?
So that is a sweeping question I can't answer without having, a whole bunch of data open in front of me, but I can tell you some examples of that. Paid family and medical leave. The United States is one of only 3 countries in the industrialized world that doesn't offer a single day of paid leave to people who need it to care for themselves or a loved one. We know that worldwide, COVID has had a devastating impact on women and on workers, and that holds true for the United States as well. So I'll talk more about the challenges we see within the United States, but I think that it's really important, as you've suggested, to recognize that the United States is part of a bigger global system and that a lot of the challenges we see transcend nation, right? So when we talk about women often being in frontline positions or getting paid less than men, I'm going to propose that holds true worldwide, but you'd want to really look into a specific country that you're interested in, or look at global data that speaks to that.
Great, thank you. And then beyond this bill, what else are you pushing for to be done on workplace justice issues?
So I would say that the takeaway on the issues I've talked about is that our economy does not work for working people. And that is a fact that we have known for quite a long time. Wages have been stuck for decades. In the past 30 years, net productivity in the US has risen by 70%, but hourly wages have stayed the same. Right now, the minimum wage in the United States is, I'm going to pause to see if anybody out in the audience knows the answer to this. Tova, do you know what it is?
$11.50?
No.
Maybe that's Illinois.
It might be in Illinois. No, it's $7.25. It is
Wow.
$7.25 an hour. That's what it is here in Pennsylvania, where I live. So you think about a family 30 years ago where you might have had, or 40 years ago, you might have had one wage earner. At that time, we all know it was typically the male or the father in the household, right? What they were earning, they were able to support the family with entirely. Not always at all. I do not want to suggest that we ever had a system that really supported working people great, but in general, that was possible, right? And that was happening a lot. Today, women are a main or the main breadwinner in about half of households. In addition, women still get paid less than men overall. On average, women get paid 80 cents to a white man's dollar, meaning if I'm going to do the easy math, if a man earns $100 a day, a woman's earning on average 80. And if you break it down even further, as we need to do in all cases, women of color are earning even less. So the wage gap, I wrote some numbers out here and I want to read them off so I get them accurate. It affects, let's say on that $1 of a white man's dollar, Black women earn on average 61 cents, Native women 58 cents, Latino women 53 cents, If we look at moms versus dads, single moms earn about 55 cents to a typical father, right? So, and then these are averages. The typical father is across all races. So I'm starting to stack up facts here, right? We know that people aren't getting paid enough. We know that women in particular aren't getting paid enough. And then when you think about families and how they survive in our economy, think about a few of the issues I've mentioned today already. So the cost of childcare, the ability to earn a living wage. I mentioned that one, right? The minimum wage. The ability to take time off to care for yourself or a loved one. And I don't mean vacation time, I mean sick time or leave. And the reasons you might take that could be a new child, a dying parent, a cancer diagnosis, a broken back, mental health or addiction treatment, and on and on and on and on. We know every single one of us is human and will need time for those issues for ourselves or a loved one, right? So when you start to stack these things up, it's next to impossible for working people to make it in this economy. Now, this was the situation before COVID. And COVID has actually absolutely kind of exploded the scene, if you will. COVID has shown us a lot of what was already there, but it's shown it to us in really stark ways. So we know more than 2 million women have left the workforce. We know that they've left often to fulfill caregiving responsibilities. We know that women are still the majority of caregivers in the home. And by that, I mean, if a child has to stay home from school because they've been exposed to the virus or their school has closed, the majority of the time it's the woman doing that. If grandma is vulnerable and can't go to the store anymore because of COVID, the majority of the time it's the woman in the family who's taking on that responsibility, and so on. And I'm going to layer in one more thing and then I'll stop, is that, again, workers of color and women, which I've already mentioned, but workers of color continue to also bear a really heavy brunt of these impacts. So, and that's for a number of reasons. One is that we have not invested in our communities equally. There are longstanding economic and health vulnerabilities that people of color face. We know that women and people of color were disproportionately impacted by things like jobs and workplaces closing, layoffs, reduced hours, and so on. So the challenges we face now, like to your question of what else are we looking at beyond the reconciliation package to address these issues, I'll recap and sum up by saying these issues have been around for a long time. They were not created by COVID, but COVID has created an important spotlight. I was going to say shined. I think that's the word, right? Has shown or shined a spotlight on the challenges we're facing. The Build Back Better plan and the reconciliation bill is one opportunity we have to address them. But A, it doesn't cover everything I mentioned earlier, right? Like minimum wage, for example. And B, it's only one moment. You know, I think advocates are hopeful we're going to win a lot through this package, but there's going to be more to do. And that's why being aware of issues, sharing your story around how challenges affect you, making sure you're registered and you vote, making sure you're taking action on campaigns or moments that organizations or advocates in your community bring forward, you know, whether it's paid sick days at your city level or some other issue you care about. That's why always being aware and taking action is so important. There's no one moment where we're just going to win everything that solves everything. I think we're going to take a really big step forward, but then there's much more work to do after that.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's all the questions I have. Was there anything else you wanted to leave us with?
I think I kind of just gave it to you in my call to action to be an advocate. I'll say that I've probably painted a pretty dire picture of workplaces and the challenges facing working people in the United States. But remember everything that we have right now, you know, including the 5-day work week, you know, the workplace protections we have, which we need more of, but which we have been brought to you by previous generations of advocates and leaders who have stepped up and called on all of us, and in particular, our elected officials, to pass measures that support working people. So as, you know, the saying goes, the road is very long. It can sometimes feel like it's full of crisis and it's a little overwhelming. But remember, there's a lot of good work that's brought us to this place. And it's by people like all of you watching, stepping up and speaking out and continuing to stay involved that will continue to move forward. So keep that in mind. Remember that government represents us. It works for people. You need to be active. You need to be engaged. You need to know where your information is coming from. You need to be a smart consumer of information and facts. You need to ask questions, always with a critical eye. You need to register. You need to vote. And you need to be a part of making the system work. That's my parting advice for all of you.